Hi, everybody. Hey, this is Mr. Forrest here again. Again, let me go ahead and share my screen. Hold on here. There we go. Here. Great. And as we get started, we're going to go to the system prompt. So I'm going to come back in here and type in CMD for command. And then let me go ahead and reacquire that screen. So hold on. Share again. Get the screen. And I can make it bigger here so I can then work with that with you guys there. Okay, so we're back to the system prompt. Now, chapter three deals with disks and formatting. You know, when we buy a storage device, whether it be a USB stick or a hard drive, a floppy disk, whatever and stuff, before those kinds of storage devices could be used, they have to be formatted. Now, some of them come pre-formatted, so it already has a starting point. But that doesn't mean that you can't go back perhaps and reformat it itself. Now, some companies have gotten very particular about the formatting process that they want to use for, say, like the USB stick, but you can usually find out on the web and stuff exactly how to best format that Kingston brand or that SanDisk brand or Lexar or whatever, okay? You know, we free-format hard drives all the time. Okay, you know, where we say, hey, somebody gave me an old hard drive and I don't want to mess with whatever somebody had on before, so I go back and I reformat the entire drive. I do what's called a low-level format, which means I check it for errors, and if there are any errors, then it marks them as bad. Now, if somebody were to give me a hard drive that was, say, you know, oh, I don't know, 16 gigabytes or whatever, not a real big drive, but whatever, okay. A terabyte, hey, somebody gave me a terabyte drive, okay. When I go through the formatting process, because it's an older drive, maybe I don't have a full terabyte, okay. Maybe I have, you know, 875 gigabytes of whatever of storage on it because the format said, hey, you had some bad sectors. I can still operate off that drive. I just reformat it and I make sure I tell it to use just the good stuff, okay? So formatting is a good thing for us to be kind of aware of. That was a really big deal stuff back in the days and stuff when we had floppy disks and stuff, because you could buy a unformatted floppy disk cheaper than one that had already been formatted. Nowadays and stuff, when you buy like a USB stick or whatever, they don't sell a different version, like one that's been formatted, one that hasn't and stuff. It just, however that manufacturer wants to put that product out there. So again, in chapter 1, it's to talk about disks and formatting, okay? And again, since I don't have a physical floppy on this drive, my drive I is my USB stick. So if I was going to format something, I would format the drive I guess I could format my drive C, but that would wipe out the computer that I'm using to do this demonstration. So I'm not going to actually execute the format command at all on this computer, okay? I'm just going to type in format /? and look at the syntax of it. Oh my gosh, there's a bunch of stuff here. So here's the syntax of the format command. Okay, I can have format with a volume, whatever, and I have various switches that are available. And so without going through every single one of them, because again, I'm not going to go through all the various options or whatever, but I think a couple of them we want to know and stuff is to sit there and say, hey, do we want a volume label? A label is like a little sticky label, right? You could put on a notepad, a post-it note or whatever. A label you'd put on a music album disc or a CD label or something like that. Well, we have labels all the time that we can place on, say, the USB. You may have remembered that I put a label on my USB stick drive I that has USB and then part of my name on it. I can format that USB stick and tell it, this is the label I want to place on it, okay? So that's what the /V followed by whatever label that I want to use, okay, is one way for me to, let's see if I got /V on here. Where's that here? Yeah, here you go. Specifies the volume label. Okay, so in the formatting process, I can format a storage device and add a /V : V for volume, and then a word, a label, whatever after that that gets assigned to it. Now I could reformat, or I could just go back and use the label command itself to change the label. Okay, and again, we're doing this from the command prompt as opposed to the GUI. We can do it very easily in the GUI. Okay, a lot of times we just right-click on the drive and then choose format, and then it says a little box like, hey, do you want a label for it or not? And then you just fill in the box or leave it blank. Okay, we can have what are called quick formats. Quick formats, again, a little bit like the Etch-a-Sketch version, where it says, hey, I don't want to reformat and check for hard or for bad sectors or bad parts of the disk. I just want to reset it, clean it out, whatever and stuff, and then allow me to start putting files in folders. So it's kind of like taking you know, a map of California, a road map of California, and erasing the map. It doesn't really erase the streets and the roads that are actually out there, but allows me to draw a new map, okay, which then I can start storing things on that new map based upon the new file names and folders that I created at that time, okay? So a quick format and stuff is pretty common out there as well, okay? So again, this was the format command, okay, where I could say, hey, I want to format, let's say I said format space I:, which is my USB stick. And it says, okay, insert this and then press enter. And I'm like, uh-oh, I don't want to format here and stuff. So I just wanted to show you what could happen. So I'm going to use Control-C to cancel. Good. And that canceled that command. I don't want to actually really format that USB stick, or else I'll have to go back and, after I'm done formatting, and I'll have to then go back and unzip the activities disk back on top of the USB, because it'll be blank again. Remember, my USB stick could be blank at this moment, but I had already unzipped it and had all those student data folders and files that are on there. So if I go back to I:, real quick and do a dir, it says, oh yeah, remember, see, these are all these files and folders that were part of the student activities disk, okay? Great. Okay, so let me clear the screen. Fantastic. Okay, so as you're going through chapter 3 and stuff, it really starts to narrow the topic about the format command. A good portion of it is just all about different ways of formatting, different types of drives, different sizes of drives. The old file allocation table structure, which was limited to how big a drive you could format, has been typically supplanted with things like NTFS, the new table file size, whatever, new technology, excuse me, files structure that Microsoft is using. So NTFS, which is a little bit different process, but says the same thing. Every computer operating system uses some kind of file structure. It doesn't matter if it's Microsoft or Unix or Apple products or Google products, whatever it is, every file system, you know, is going to be established, because the whole purpose of having a storage device is to be able to save files and retrieve them later. So we need a structure to be able to do that, kind of like creating boxes. And the question would be is, what box are you referring to? What folder, subfolder, directory, subdirectory? And then how big is it? And what's the name of it? What's the label on it? So I know what's there, okay, kind of stuff. So again, the format command goes through quite a bit in this chapter. There's quite a bit of discussion about FAT, file allocation tables, and NTFS, okay, and then specifically about formatting with the command, say, hey, I want to say format space, let's say format I:/V:, and then I say I want Forestier as my volume label, and I want to do it /Q as quickly as possible without having to recheck all the stuff. So, you know, I could do something like that. I'm going to back that out because I don't really want to do that format command. Okay, and so, and then again, if I type in dir, let me go back to C drive. Okay, because it's just a shorter one. Dir, I see that the volume label. There is no volume label for drive C on this one. So I could add a label command by saying label, and I'll call it Forestier. Okay. And it says, okay, I don't have privileges on this one yet. So let me go to drive I, which I don't have them. I do have privileges on, and I can say label and Forestier. Okay. And it says, great. Now if I do a dir, I scroll back up here to the top. It now says, oh, the volume drive I is Forestier. I now have a label, as opposed to when I did it before, I didn't have a label. Like here's drive C, it didn't have a label, okay? So I've now added a label to that process, okay? By using the label command to add one. If I said volume, it would just be, what is the label? And it says, oh, VOL is the command that says, what is the label for this default location, which is drive I? So again, if I go to C:, and I typed in VOL, it says, oh, drive C does not have a label. And again, these will correspond also with your graphical user interface when you go to the File Explorer in Microsoft, as an example, whatever, you'll see the label next to the USB stick, okay? And so you can, again, You can change your labels by using the label command. If you're going to format, you can format it and add the label as you're formatting it, or you can format it first and then go back and use the label command to apply a label. Again, I can change that label. Let's go back to my drive I:, and I can say label, let's say I called it USB-forest, because I think there's 11 characters. No problem, and I type in VOL, and it says, oh, see, there you go. Now, every time I plug in my USB stick, if I see USB-forest, I also know right now that's my drive, my USB stick. So I know that's the one that I'm using. So hopefully it gives you a good overview of the Chapter 3, Basics of Disks and Formatting. All right, so let me go ahead and stop the share, and you guys have a great day.